Hello, my name is Tina Andres, and today I want to talk with you about successful learning at university. We here at Freiburg have developed an adaptive online learning strategy training for our freshmen in educational psychology, and today I want to talk with you about that training and how we developed it. In general, there are two ways to make learning more successful, at university but also at other places. The traditional way is to improve the teaching, and the complementary way is to improve students' learning. When we think about improving our teaching, we can think of different aspects. We can think about using the suitable teaching methods. We can think about providing good learning materials. Of course, we should answer open questions the learners still have. And we can also think about monitoring the students' progress to help them to learn. When we think about the complementary way, we think about effective learning. In that case, we think about cognitive strategies people can use, like organization, elaboration, to make their learning efficient and effective. We can think about monitoring their learning. In that case, we think about metacognitive strategies to really control how far they already got in the learning content. And the third point is that they can manage their own learning. Here we think about resource strategies. So all in all, we can think about fostering learning strategies to improve the students' learning. This second aspect is what we were focused on with our adaptive learning strategy training. When we think about learning strategy trainings, they should reach different goals. One goal is teaching declarative knowledge about the learning strategies, so that every student knows what an elaborative strategy is, for example. The second point is that we should teach students the pros and cons of different strategies in different contexts. This is the so-called meta-knowledge. So when we come back to our example, when to use an elaborative strategy. And the third point is that we should provide authentic contexts of strategy application to our students so they can train their strategies. The fourth important point is that you fade the support you give the students for that strategy application, that in the end they can applicate their strategies on their own. When we want to implement a strategy training at university, we of course also have to think about the environment we find at universities. As an educator, we have much smaller influence on the learning process of each individual learner. We also have less contact and supervision of the students. It's very limited to special kind of students or students with several problems. In the end, we're not able to support all students individually. On the other hand, from the student's perspective, there are also some things have changed coming from school to university. The time frames they have for learning become much smaller than they were as they were in school. Additionally, they have to reach a much deeper level of understanding within the content, and they have to reach that level independently. So all in all, they need much more self-regulation than they already needed in school. Our approach to address that environment is an online course which we can implement in our first semester without changing much of the content we actually have in that seminar. The strategy training itself consists of 3 parts. The first part are learning video and texts. This learning video and text should provide students with the declarative and metacognitive knowledge. We did that using multimedia learning material, like you can see here on the right hand, which uses texts and pictures to provide the information, and we used emotional design elements. Here in the middle you can see our Alice. She is the social agent which guides through the whole tool. The second part is the consolidation of declarative and metacognitive knowledge. To do so, we used a spaced retrieval practice method, which was adapted to the level of prior knowledge each individual student had. Within that spaced retrieval practice, we used declarative and meta-knowledge tasks. Here you see some of the tasks. At the top you see the meta-knowledge task, which was a scenario-based task where you should grade the different strategies which could be used. And down there you see a declarative task, which is basically a cube recall task. And the third part of our training is the application of the learning strategies. To support self-regulation of the strategy application, we supported our learners with implementation intentions, which I will explain later a little more. So let's come to the first aspect, which is the learning videos and text. Theoretically, we thought about what is the most important factor in online learning and what should we work on most when we develop our training. So we know that motivation is a very important First, learners increase their invested learning time. When we think about time and task issues, this is always an important factor. And when we think about MOOCs and other online courses, motivation reduces the dropout a lot. So we decided to work on motivation as our main factor. The goal was to increase students' motivation with our design, of course to not distract them from actual learning. We provided an experiment. It was within subject design and had two phases. An intervention phase, which had different types of advanced organizers, and an assessment phase, in which we assessed as well conceptual and meta knowledge. In our intervention, we used three conditions. The one was a classical text and graphic based advanced organizer, the second was a neutral video, and the third one was an emotional designed video. They were all randomized in sequence in text and within subject design. In our results, we found significant effects of emotional video in respect to situational interest. So in the end, we found the emotional design effect for our material. Additionally, there were no difference between the text and the video in respect to the learning outcomes. Not in meta-knowledge and also not in declarative knowledge. So in the end, we also did not really find the seductive details effect within our material. So we come to the second aspect of our strategy training. Our theoretical background for the consolidation is the retrieval practice or testing effect. We already know that the retrieval practice is a pretty effective learning strategy. It can strengthen new learning material. This is the classical testing effect, so that you have better long-term retention after initial recall in contrast to restudy. And there is a second aspect to it. Retrieval activates also closed link materials, which leads to enhanced memory also for that material that has never been recalled. We address this aspect under the term of retrieval-based facilitation. So when retrieval practice is already so efficient, how can we push learning by retrieval even further? So we thought about, when does retrieval help remember? One aspect which is crucial is that retrieval for learning has to be successful. So when you cannot retrieve on any content, you also cannot learn or enhance. When you think about some content, for example about my earlier talk, and you cannot retrieve it at all, of course it cannot be strengthened. So the first thing is that your retrieval has to be successful. The second point is that retrieval should be mentally effortful. So if you right now think about what I told you earlier in that talk, then it's probably not very effortful because it's a short term and you can probably think easily of that. When you think about what you have eaten 3 days ago, then this might be much more difficult. In the end, we try to reach a certain level of difficulty, which is the level where retrieval is most demanding but still successful. Here you see that little line, which will just show you that when this most demanding level, when you reach that most demanding level, and you go only a little further, you won't be successful anymore. But what is the problem when we think about a demanding task? So when we think about a student with a lower prior knowledge, a task could be on his edge of a demanding and successful task, but for a middle or higher prior knowledge student, be still in a low demanding state. No matter what, if we use a special kind of a demanding task, we will lower the retrieval success for some learners. So we use prior knowledge as a predictor in our retrieval practice tasks. We again implemented that within subject design. We had a learning phase, which was text-based. We had an intervention phase with different retrieval formats. And we had an assessment phase, which was conducted 1 week after the intervention phase. The intervention phase had 3 conditions again. We had a classical restudy condition, which was a reread of the content in a shortened text version. We had a conceptual task, which was answering to conceptual questions. And we had a meta-knowledge task, which was that scenario-based task where you had to create different strategies. Again, we had a randomization in the sequence and texts here. The first hypothesis was that we find a retrieval practice effect for our 2 recall conditions. To understand the results a little better, I show you that already in detail for the prior, middle, and high prior knowledge students. For low prior knowledge, we found no significant differences between the 3 conditions. There were also no interactions between prior knowledge and the 3 conditions. When we look to medium prior knowledge, we found a retrieval practice effect for the metacognitive tasks, so the scenario-based tasks. For the high prior knowledge, we also find a retrieval practice effect. But here we find it for the conceptual task and not the metacognitive tasks. So, summing up our results, first of all, the retrieval practice hypothesis, we had a retrieval practice effect, but this retrieval practice effect was very different between the different task types. We had an interaction between the task type and the prior knowledge, which is a classical aptitude treatment interaction. With such aptitude treatment interactions, adaptivity is an important point. So in a normal classroom setting, we would use this to give our students very specific advice. In our learning program, we use this prior knowledge adaptivity algorithm within our strategy training to adapt our retrieval practice to every individual learner. Coming to the third part of our approach, the application of learning strategies. Within several years of research, there's one thing which stays true for most of strategy trainings, that there is no spontaneous application of these strategies in everyday life. So this is why after strategy training, support is necessary to help students to applicate the new learned learning strategies. And of course, there are different forms of support. One, which is evaluated very positively, is prompts. Prompts are formulation which support learners in specific learning situations to apply their learning strategies. These prompts are normally provided by the teacher, or in our case, for example, by the learning program. What we wanted to add to this aspect is the support of self-regulation. When you provide students only in specific learning situations with such support, they won't apply the strategies in their everyday life. So we use the concept of implementation intentions. Implementation intentions are sentences which use a trigger condition and a goal behavior. In the trigger condition, you normally find things like where and when a certain behavior should take place. If I spot a central content in text, this could be a perfect trigger condition. The second part is the goal behavior. In the goal behavior, we specify the what is to do when this specific trigger condition takes place. For example, in our context of the learning strategies, it could be something like, I will think of an own example, which is of course an elaborative strategy. And then you have in mind, if I spot a central content in a text, I will think of an own example. We also provided an experiment here. We had a between subject design with around 150 people and had 3 phases. We had a pre-test and we had an intervention phase, which lasted 3 weeks and had phased support. And we had an assessment phase, which has a quality and a quantitative assessment of learning strategies within and after these 3 weeks. In our intervention, we had 3 different types. We had the prompt intervention, which was a classical intervention inspired by findings of learning journal writing. We had a classical implementation intention condition, where there were self-generated implementation intentions, and we had scaffolded implementation intention, where we supported by prompts learners in the formulation of their implementation intentions. Summing up our results, the scaffolded implementation intention condition raised the application and the quality of the learning strategies. The most important factor was the quality of the implementation intentions. Although this was a very important factor, the mean quality of implementation intention was rather low, which was around 3 from 5 points. This is where we conducted a second experiment, which had a special focus on the quality of implementation intentions. We again had around 150 participants in a between subject design and had a pretty similar experimental design to the study before. But now we had a 2x2 factorial design. The one factor was the trigger condition support, which helps students to understand the special challenge in formulating implementation intentions about learning strategies for the trigger condition. The second support was specific for the meta-knowledge which is needed to come from the goal behavior or from a goal strategy like elaboration to the specific behavior of, for example, thinking of an own example. We are still analyzing this data, but we have first results that we have better implementation intention quality after these 2 interventions. Especially successful seems to be the trigger condition support intervention. So all in all, we increased the motivation for our learning strategy training by implementing emotional design. This is evaluated by behavioral scales as well as time on task effects. We have an adaptive consolidation by retrieval practice, which can be used for effective adaptivity. At last, we also reached an increase in our learning strategy quality. Also, we have to look here further into detail. Thank you for listening. If you have any further questions or want to use our tool, just contact me by email.